Hi, everybody. I'm Nicole Konkol, your friendly neighborhood archaeologist. Thanks for joining us for the 2021 Frankfort Heritage Week. I wanted to open by telling you a little bit about myself. And after the past year or so in this COVID world, it's been a little tough at times to remember why I love what I do. So, in a sense, I'm going to use this presentation to remind myself and to share with you why it is that I do what I do. I'm a review archaeologist at the Kentucky Heritage Council by day, and I also sit on Frankfort's Architectural Review Board. These jobs have review in common, and some of the preservation tenets used in each role overlap. There are quite a few different types of preservationists working in Kentucky. Archaeologists that work at the Kentucky Heritage Council do a variety of different things. We get lots of calls, questions, and requests pertaining to a variety of cultural resource concerns. There's one mission we review archaeologists have above all others. It's a primary imperative, you might say. It is neither bold nor glamorous, nor what folks probably imagine when they think about what an archaeologist does, but it is important. Under federal law, every project throughout the Commonwealth that uses federal money or requires a permit requires archaeological review within 30 days. So with 3 archaeologists and 120 counties, and goodness knows how many federal agencies, this job keeps us hopping, to say the least. So 3 archaeologists, 120 counties, 30 days. Much like review archaeology, the primary imperative of the Architectural Review Board is design review. Members of the ARB look at each project that meets or doesn't meet a certain criteria prescribed by city ordinances. We use those ordinances and guidelines to review projects to make sure the activities proposed preserve significant characteristics of properties in the historic districts, characteristics and features that make these properties and districts unique. While I absolutely love what I do, sometimes when I get started in the morning, this slide illustrates a little bit of how the inside of my head looks. These are the tools of a reviewer's job: laws, standards, and guidelines. There's a common misunderstanding I really want to point out about review. What and how a reviewer reviews anything is dictated by laws, standards, and guidelines. Certain triggers or thresholds have to be met for a review to be required, and certain parameters are applied to that review. Sometimes it feels like when a reviewer says that something does not meet this criteria or this guideline, or that whatever process or protocol doesn't apply, I feel like what people hear is, this is not important to me, or this resource isn't important. And that is not what reviewers are saying. What we are saying is that based on all these rules, we can't comment or we can't agree, but what we're never saying it's not important. The preservation review process at its best is not just about preserving the resource, but about preserving the resource while meeting the goals of a project. And sure, it is great to preserve historic resources, but what really makes my day, what really floats my boat about my job, are the days when I get to help preserve the resource and get that road built, or the tower built, or the application or proposal of whatever kind gets to move forward while we're preserving the resource. Those are the days that I love the best. These rules and the guidelines and the agreements are hugely important. But for today, let's not focus on the rules. I want to talk about a few of Frankfort's archaeological sites, and I really want to listen to what other folks have to say about what resources are important to them, because it matters. It always matters. For context, check out this groovy map of the 3 historic zones in Frankfort, courtesy of city staff. Special Historic is shown in red to the northwest. Central Business is in yellow to the north, and Special Capital is shown on the south, and a river runs through it. None of these districts are documented as significant specifically because of archaeology. But this area represents Frankfort's core, and it provides an excellent framework to look at a few archaeological tidbits. This slide shows the rough estimates based on previous archaeological investigations in the area, and it is likely that more work has been done than is reflected here on the slide. And it is a sure thing that there are more archaeological sites out there that have not yet been documented. As far as documented archaeological sites in historic Frankfort, I think we're up to 33 now. But data haven't been updated with the Office of State Archaeology to that extent yet. So here's a glimpse at a few of the archaeological sites in Frankfort's downtown area. Perhaps one of the most interesting discoveries I made while perusing through previous archaeological research came from a report drafted on archaeological sites within a portion of Leslie Morris Park. Most of us are familiar with Fort Hill, but did you know that there are additional significant archaeological sites in the park, not just the Civil War site? The following information comes from archaeological investigation conducted on behalf of the City of Frankfort's Department of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Sites. Shortly after the Civil War, the 19th century Weber farmstead was situated on the west half of the hill. The historic farmstead was sold in 1866 to Robert Martin, Henry Samuel, Tab Smith, and John H. Thomas, a group of African American freemen. From 1879 to 1883, the Colored Baptist denomination of Kentucky owned that property. Following that, the property was again deeded to Peter Smith and then to Tab Smith until 1895. Other cultural resources in Leslie Morris Park include the 19th century Edwards Farmstead and the former and current location of the Old Frankfort Cemetery. There are stone fences like the one shown in the picture above in the park as well. Recent archaeological investigations have gone on within the park, and I look forward to hearing what new things may have been learned about the cultural resources there. In the late 1970s, grant monies were awarded to Liberty Hall for a restoration project. Detailed archaeological investigations were conducted in conjunction with that work. Archaeological features dating to the time of the Brown family occupation of the property were identified, including cellar entrances, cisterns, privies, and more. These features tell archaeologists and you more about the layout of the entire property and how it was used by the Brown family when they lived there. For more information, please visit the Liberty Hall Historic Site webpage. The public square, also known as the Old Capitol Lawn. It's not only an archaeological site, but it's also a National Historic Landmark. This spot is one of my all-time favorites in Frankfort because it was in use as a public square as long ago as the 1830s, and it was still in use as a public square last weekend. And we are fortunate that it is protected for all of us under the Kentucky Antiquities Act. I want to point out that the historic photographs on the slide were provided by John Carlton. Well, those were a few of my favorite archaeological sites. And I could go on for a while about those, but that's enough about the ones I love. So now it's your turn to share. I've asked several people in our community about cultural resources important to them. I asked friends, family, neighbors, children, strangers. If a cultural resource is a tangible evidence of past human activity 50 years old or older, what is a cultural resource important to you that may or may not be important to others in the community, and why? Ms. Patty Cross, ARB member, shared the following. I also want to point out here that I truly wish that the authors of the cultural resource information I'm about to get into could be here to read their own words themselves, but COVID times. So these are all in the words of the authors. So Ms. Patty Cross, ARB member. Frankfort is blessed with a wealth of cultural resources, each significant in their own way. Each day when I wake and go outside my home in South Frankfort, I'm faced with the beauty of the diversity of architectural styles all around me. I truly believe that Frankfort is the prettiest and most charming state capital in our country. One aspect I am most drawn to are the rock walls. Some dry stack, some mortared. All around Frankfort and Franklin County, there are many examples of rock walls. The first rock fences in Kentucky were built by the early settlers of Scots-Irish origin, who brought their dry stone masonry skills and knowledge with them. In the mid-1800s, crews of Irish masons built many of the fences that bordered the Commonwealth's newly created turnpikes. By the 1880s, rock fences lined most roads and many farmlands throughout the bluegrass. Only 5 to 10% of the rock fences built by the Irish immigrant stonemasons still stand. These stonemasons passed their craft on to slaves of prisoners who became masters of the craft of building rock walls. Most of the stone walls visible along the streets in Frankfort used mortar to bond together the masonry. The earliest mortared masonry walls used a soft mixture consisting primarily of sand and lime. Those walls, built in the early 20th century, probably used a newly manufactured additive, Portland cement. You can still find examples of dry stack walls in out-of-the-way places in Frankfort. My fascination with rock walls dates to the first time I ever saw one along the side of Country Road. I was fortunate to be able to participate in a dry stone workshop 15 or 20 years ago. I also watched intently as stonemasons repaired the mortared stone wall next to our home when it was in danger of collapse. That is the wall pictured here. Next, Miss Angela Fitzpatrick shared some information about cultural resources important to her. We have been renovating our 135-year-old home for the last several years. We love this old house and hope to restore it back to its original look and design. This past winter, while preparing for some work to be done around the foundation, my husband spent time in the crawl space to make it accessible for the workmen, and while he was working to remove scraps from previous work, old materials, and trash in the space, he discovered an iron finger candle holder lying in the dirt beneath our house. I was thrilled with this discovery. It surely must be connected to our home and a person or family who resided here long ago. It is very crude and imperfect and even has a bit of old candle wax still visible. It is maybe important only to us because of the connection it has to our house, but it also represents another time and is physical evidence of that time period, illustrating its resources, customs, and I think, interestingly, a connection to some previous residents' activities. I can only imagine who held and used this little candle holder and wonder and search for who that owner may have been. I do have a few creative stories, interestingly enough, theories on how the candle holder came to be under the house. My husband located the candle holder in the crawl space area that is directly under the staircase. The staircase has a small door under it on the back side where a tiny space is sort of hidden here beneath the stairs. It is, and was most likely always, a nice storage area. One of my theories is an early resident who lived here may have used this space to hide something important to him or her, like whiskey or more notable and popular now, Kentucky bourbon. When the candle holder was found, my husband also found a pit of whiskey bottles with many broken, but many intact with glass stoppers. These bottles were not randomly tossed around in the crawl space, but buried together down in a hole. There is only one which still has a small remnant of its label and present and visible on the back, showing faded areas or pieces of the original label, and this is somewhat readable. I can barely make out a sort of warning label on the back of this bottle and read the faded ink as George T. Stagg, Master Distiller. This label does have the whiskey bond date on it, March 3rd, 1897. So with the help of this date, I can at least sort of have an idea of the age of the bottles and possibly the candle holder. My theory or story is someone who lived in this house knew and used a hidden space under the staircase to pop up the floorboards of the floor and lower the finger candle holder down into the darkened space to locate, use, and hide his bottle or many bottles of bourbon. It is only a theory to a mystery, but the fact that our house has these hidden stories, artifacts, and historic remains to people who call this place home and how they live their lives are fascinating. I think of how Kentucky Bourbon and Buffalo Trace, which is located so close to our home and has in recent years boomed in popularity and enjoyed such an increase in interest in sales along with the rest of the bourbon industry, existed even in these early days and was part of the community and a thriving industry. It is interesting to us that it was abundantly available with traces of its past found here in our house. The items we have found have given us clues to the past and people who have lived here, worked, and raised families. And even though these items found may not be of interest or small in relation to larger discoveries for circles or bigger groups of populations, they're small discoveries of ours and are of close of interest to us living here in this house, which has stood throughout the years since 1886. And we, the present residents, have gained and learned ourselves from these wonderful items found beneath our home. The following is shared by Christy Poe. The Singing Bridge is one of Frankfort, Kentucky's historical landmarks. As cars pass over the open grate steel deck foundation of the bridge, they make a humming sound. Thus the nickname Singing Bridge was born. One of the last standing bridges built by the King Bridge Company. It was commissioned in 1893 and opened for use in 1894. That is the only history regarding this bridge that most of the citizens living in Frankfort, Kentucky are aware of to date. For African Americans, that history is a bit different. Our name for the bridge is the Swinging Bridge. Just months after it opened for cars in 1894, the bridge was inaugurated with the lynching of a black man, Marshall Boston, on August 14, 1894. John Maxey would suffer the same fate years later on June 3, 1909. As most look at this relic from years past and marvel at the beauty she once held, others are haunted only by the painful history. As they say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. ARB member Jen Oberlin. One resource that is special to me is the Old State Capitol complex. The architectural significance of the building is as splendid as the site of the building itself. To me, the Old State Capitol complex, that includes the building itself, its annex, and the lawn, complete with a fountain, not only symbolize the beginning of Frankfort as the seat of politics for Kentucky, but also provides the community at large with a wonderful built environment for us to celebrate large-scale community events to more intimate friend and family gatherings. It is the perfect setting to remind us all of our community's significant past. Ken Konkol, my father-in-law, shares. Kentucky abounds with places of cultural and historical significance, but Melody Park, right here in Frankfort, is of special significance to me. As a relative newcomer to the area, I am fortunate that I can enjoy the beauty of what remains of Melody Park on a daily basis. It forms the backyard for my neighbors and me, and I actually own a piece of it. My wife and I enjoy sitting on the stone terrace adjacent to the stone pillars that once formed a Japanese-style pagoda, and imagine the picnickers of years past enjoying the flowers, ponds, and statuary as we watch the various watercraft floating along the river below us. And along the similar lines, my husband, Zachary Konkol, is also talking about the river. I was raised on the creek, a trickle of a thing for most of the season that spring rains would occasionally swell into a torrent come April. Canoe Creek. A good name, even if it was often lacking the water necessary for a canoe. During the long, dry summers, we'd walk the paths along its banks and shoot at the blackbirds. During the floods, we'd canoe through the forest behind the house. Now my creek is the Kentucky River. From the window of my home office, I watch it daily and think of its journey. When it meets the Ohio, it will marry with the water of the New and the Kanawha. Memories of summers spent hiking and rafting the waters of West Virginia will get to know my wife and neighbors at long last. It'll then pick up some baggage at Henderson, Kentucky, where I spent most of my youth. Maybe a W.C. Handy rag as well. Near Paducah, the remains of my college years spent at Murray now eroded down into the Tennessee River and Kentucky Lake will come spilling in. At the juncture of the Ohio and Mississippi, my time at Wycliffe Mounds. My little house on this Kentucky River is a web of nodes, connections, and memories. Along with my neighbors and the greater Frankfort, I share this little space along the river with thousands of species of insects, a wealth of native flora, a wonderful display of fungi, and incalculable microorganisms. The water that flows by every day is not only filled with seeds and spores, but also memories. The detritus of human existence is vast and varied. Plastics and poems, excrement and empathy. Here in the bluegrass, near the foothills of Appalachia, we occupy a sacred geographical space. As one of many upstream partners in a vast cultural and natural web that spans more than 1 million square miles, I think often of the natural cycles that sustain such a system and of us silly little humans. The greater Mississippi watershed occupies a mythic center within our greater American collective unconscious. Bourbon and bluegrass, rock and roll and the blues. The journey out west and out my back door, the Kentucky River is continually singing a tune as inspirational as it is confrontational. Not all memories are pleasant. Agony and ecstasy jump between the eddies and ripples, bounced about, worn down, and made smooth. I sometimes look at a bead of water shining on my fishing pole line near the juncture of Benson Creek and the Kentucky River and wonder at its journey. Where did it come from, that particular bead of water? Where has it been? What clouds, what oceans, and what glaciers? How many lives would I touch should I try to hold it in my hand for a moment? How many memories and how many dreams of the future? And then the wind picks up. The bead of water drops into the river, lost, but for the moment, not forgotten. Delvin Azophypha, and Delvin, I sure hope that I'm saying your last name correctly. He provided two answers. One is local to Frankfort, and the other from what archaeologists might consider Frankfort's trade network. In Frankfort, he says, there's no cultural resource more important to me than Paul Sawyer Library. There is the rich collection of books, newspapers, and media available for consumption, but that isn't my main reason for making this choice. The variety of community meetings and activities offered for free has allowed me to learn new skills and become acquainted with some of the finest people Frankfort has to offer. Delvin's original response was a resource in Louisville, so I'd like to share that also. There's no other place that makes me think of family, friends, and community than Dizzy Whiz Restaurant, located on 4th and St. Catherine Street in Louisville. I don't plan to kill anyone, but if I was on death row, I'd have to get a whiz burger with cheese, their crunchy, crispy crinkle fries, and a banana shake. According to their sign, they've been in business since 1947. Every big city has a place like this that has urban wear, but is a staple in downtown Louisville. If you're looking for fancy accoutrements, you won't find them here. I mean no disrespect when I say it's a hole-in-the-wall type of place. A more aloof person might turn their nose up at the cramped ordering space in the entrance. The customer bathroom isn't attached to the establishment itself. In fact, Customers have to go outside and around the back, which is technically in the back of the kitchen. For me, Dizzy Whiz says home. There are some employees who have been working there for decades who know what the regulars want when they show up. I've lived outside of Louisville for so long that I'm no longer a regular, but I'm always called back to Dizzy Whiz. Long before I knew of a Sonic, Dizzy Whiz had curbside service. Sometimes it gets awfully cold in the River City, but the staff always comes out to your car with a smile. Dizzy Whiz is a Louisville tradition that I recommend to anyone who plans to visit. Hmm. ARB member Brittany Sams shared the following. One cultural resource that is special to me is Shaker Village of Pleasant Hill in Harrodsburg, Kentucky. Working as a program specialist at Shaker Village was my first job after finishing my master's degree, and it could not have been a more special time. There are places in the world that were so remarkable at their height, in their time and place, that the essence of the people who lived there and their ideologies remain in the built environment. Excuse me for waxing poetic a little here, but for anyone who has not visited Shaker Village and is reading this, go and you will see exactly what I mean. Shaker Village is an idyllic setting, and the architecture strongly tells a story about the beliefs and achievements of the people who lived there. Preservation at its finest. I am honored that I was able to work there for a year before moving on to my current position, and it is a time in my life I will never forget. John Carlton shared the following. These are not exactly precisely his words, because we were kind of having a conversation about it. So I took tidbits from our conversation. So John shares the following. For John, a large charcoal of his fourth great grandmother is important to him. It was in a secret compartment of a trunk belonging to his second great grandmother. He and his mother discovered it, and there were several charcoals inside, with notes identifying each person. There's a doll at the Kentucky Historical Society that was made in the likeness of his fourth great grandmother. He asked to see it once, expecting a small, normal-sized doll, but it was the size of a large one-year-old infant or bigger. He said, and this is a quote, "I felt like someone was handing me a child, and realizing I was the first person in my family to touch the doll in almost 100 years, I broke into tears." Stafford Easterling shares the following about a cultural resource. My answer to your question would be an ode to the humble backyard fence. While it may or may not be considered a cultural resource in normal times, having a fenced-in backyard was a godsend for me and my dog during the pandemic. The red cedar planking isn't old enough and or unique to Kentucky enough to warrant a place alongside the great stone fences of old, but I believe this style of fencing is as much a product of this specific time period as the stone fences were of that time period. Good fences make for good neighbors, truly safe outdoor space, and sanity possible as a single person living alone, not really dealing with another human being for over a year. Kate and Jay Roberts, joined by their brother Sam in the slide. Jay says that the old Capitol is one of his favorite cultural resources because it's a fun place to play, ride his scooter, and is close enough to walk to. His sister, Kate's favorite cultural resource is Liberty Hall. She likes to walk through the garden and attend the events held there in the summer. ARB member Irma Johnson shares about the following cultural resource. As a real estate agent who grew up on a Central Virginia farm, the cultural resource that has a special significance to me is the front porch. As a child growing up in a rural community, the front porch was the place where friends, family, and even foes gather for conversation and debate. It was the portal to conversation for all things family and community. It was the first safe place where children could interact with the community, whether it is large or small. A welcoming front porch with a swing or rocking chair and fragrant flowers is an asset to any home. As I drive through subdivisions and streets across America, the front porch is a feature I always notice. To everyone who shared your answers, thank you. My reason for asking this of you was in part selfish. I did need that reminder coming out of the isolation we've all been going through for over a year of why it is I do what I do. I also wanted to have an opportunity, not bound by the laws, standards, and guidelines of any review, to say these resources are important. Your appreciation of them is important. This matters. I learned from your sharing that some of us have the same shared resources that we consider important. And that even though the same resources may be important to some of us, they may be important for different reasons. And more still, our perceptions of the resources themselves may be vastly different. So again, thank you for sharing. And I'm not done asking for your input yet. I want to ask everyone watching to do 3 things. Think about what you may have learned about your friends and neighbors, even strangers, by listening to what they've shared about the cultural resources important to them. What have you learned about your community? Now, second thing, imagine you are an archaeologist of the future, say 100 years from now, or 500 years from now. What would these resources look like then? Where would they be found? Would they still exist as they do today? Would they be in ruins? Would all that is left be fragments or stains in the soil? Would you be able to recreate what these resources were from what was left? What would you interpret them to mean to the community of Frankfort then? And one last thing, we have a little time left in Frankfort Preservation Week. So throughout the rest of the month, if you'd like to talk more about cultural resources, or if you have a cultural resource that you'd like to share with me or talk with me about, please send me a Facebook message. Because let's keep talking because it matters. Now, moving on to the next part of the presentation. How can you be a good steward of archaeological resources in Frankfort? What would you want to do if you want to learn more about the archaeological resources in your property? Before any archaeologist excavates, we do tons of research. Typically, the first thing I do is look at maps of the project area. These might include sandborne maps, topographic maps, soil maps, aerial maps, and any other number of current and historic maps that you might be able to find. That way we can get an idea of land use through time in the area. Then once we do that, we're ready to dig, right? No. We move on to background research. We check with the Office of State Archaeology at UK to see if any archaeological survey has been done in or near the project area. We might also double check with the Kentucky Heritage Council to see if there are above ground historic resources. For Frankfort, the Capital City Museum has historic documents and photographs, as does the Kentucky Historical Society. Our local library could have any number of useful resources. It's also good to check with the city for zoning and historic districts and properties, and with the county clerk and PBA to look at deeds for the property. So now we're ready to dig, right? No. We've already gotten an idea of what the soils might look like in the area when we're done doing our map research. Now we need to look at what types of disturbances may have occurred in the project area, particularly to the soils. Was there house raised in the vicinity? Are there buried utility lines? Is there potential for some type of hazard to be found in the soil? And always, always call 811 before digging. So now are we ready to dig? In my opinion, it is always best to call an archaeologist before you dig, even before you surface collect artifacts. This is not because archaeologists don't want folks to enjoy archaeology or care about it themselves, kind of the opposite. It's really, really important that the public cares about and is interested in archaeological resources. That's the whole reason some of us do what we do. But here's the thing about archaeology. Once you dig it up, its context can't be put back together. There's a whole slew of information that archaeologists obtain from where an artifact or where an archaeological feature is identified. We've talked a little about the information we get before we dig, but there's even more data we collect while we're digging. And if we don't get that data then, we can't get it. It's just lost forever. We learn as much, sometimes even more, from where the artifacts came from, both horizontally and vertically on the landscape. And plus, if the site is significant in archaeology, excavation itself, archaeological excavation, can be considered a disturbance to the site. And if the site is dug up without documentation, its integrity is damaged. Sometimes to the point even that the site can no longer be considered a significant archaeological site. So here on this slide, I show like a list of did you knows. So what you see here, I will let you read through it. But with the did you knows, I also have a list of questions that landowners in particular might ask when considering archaeological resources during construction. Was there a historic structure located in this area, or multiple structures over time? Did a historically significant person live here? What do historic maps show in this area? Has there been significant ground disturbance in this area? Is there a way to preserve the archaeological site during construction? So those questions are always good to ask, and these points shown on this slide are also important. Here are some examples of archaeological features that are likely to still exist in Frankfort's historic districts. Examples of archaeological features include rock walls, iron fencing, wells, cisterns, basements, privies. So in wrapping up, I'd like to say thank you again. Specifically, thank you to the volunteers who shared their information on cultural resources. Thank you to the Franklin County Trust for Historic Preservation for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. Thank you to all the participants in Frankfort Heritage Week. This is really amazing how well these people have come together. Thank you to the City of Frankfort, Kentucky, for all the technical scheduling and every other way you helped, and thanks for all the things you do every day. But I'd especially like to thank Jen Oberlin, the Public Outreach Committee member for the Architectural Review Board, Jordan Miller for helping with recording and technical matters, and Vicki Berenberg for helping with planning and organization. Thanks everyone who joined.